Welcome to the Endpoints podcast, presented by the ALS Therapy Development Institute. I'm Jonathan Gang. 25 years ago, Stephen Ascher and Jeanne Jordan began filming a documentary about a new, one-year-old organization and the family that founded it. That organization was called the ALS Therapy Development Foundation, and its mission was to find treatments for ALS. It was started by Jamie Heywood, whose brother Stephen had been diagnosed with the disease at the age of 29. The film they made, So Much So Fast, came out in 2006. It received critical acclaim and was screened at the Sundance Film Festival. It documents 5 years in the lives of the Heywood family as they dealt with Stephen's progressing disease while simultaneously building what would eventually become ALS TDI, the world's most comprehensive drug discovery lab dedicated solely to ALS. Today, on Endpoints, Stephen and Jeanne join us to talk about what it was like during the earliest days of ALS TDI, what it's been like watching the organization evolve, and how their own story helped inspire the film.
We started filming with Jamie and Stephen and Ben and all the Heywoods in 2000. My mother had died of ALS in 1995. And at the time, there was nothing that you could find ever about ALS, really, even books so we decided, because we're filmmakers and have a long track record of filmmaking, that we wanted to do a film about it. And we saw the article that Jonathan wrote in the New Yorker about Jamie and Stephen and ALS TDF. And we approached them about filming. And they amazingly agreed.
So, I mean, we were really attracted to this story because it had both Stephen's story of living with the illness and Jamie's story of starting the foundation and trying to find a cure. So we thought that those two things together would make a really interesting film. We knew that we were going to be filming for a long time, and we kind of pitched it to the Heywoods as if, well, even though you don't know us, you basically were asking to kind of become your best friends and be able to film pretty much anything as things went on, and that's what happened.
Stephen and Jeanne say they quickly realized their initial impressions were true. Jamie Heywood and the organization he and his family were working to get off the ground would be a uniquely compelling subject for a documentary.
Well, there was something very exciting about Jamie's whole concept, which was, first of all, that he wasn't a medical researcher to begin with. He was an engineer, and that they wanted to kind of bypass the traditional route of medical research at the time because the timeline was so short. And the basic principle was, we don't have time to test drugs in the normal way, so let's create a system to throw as many existing approved drugs at the mouse model and see if we can make something, get a hit on something as a way to accelerate this process in order to save people who are alive today. And it seemed like a really radical model, and we were very excited about the idea of trying to follow that.
I would say, as far as impressions of Jamie, I think cheeky might be a word that one might use for Jamie. Really charming, and really he had such a mission, and it was very moving to know both he and Stephen, who, by the way, were quite different in personality from each other. But Jamie was just the right person for what he was trying to do, and he had a lot of confidence about it, which he needed to have.
It wasn't a large group of people, but a whole lot of them had a direct connection to Stephen and to the family, or to somebody who had ALS. So there was a very personal feeling, like, we're here to save the people that we care about. So really felt like this incredibly kind of mission-driven, intimate, almost an extension of the family in a certain way. Robert Monazzoli and Ken Thompson, who had, known the brothers growing up. It really felt like what you would hope would happen if you got sick, that the people that care about you deeply would find this way to try to make a difference
and be as incredibly smart and as Jamie and Stephen, and they all were, because they they really had great tools to do this in a way that, many families might not.
Jeanne and Stephen remember the early energy at ALS TDI as kinetic and exciting. The organization was trying to solve a problem that had long seemed unsolvable, and were innovating a completely new approach to drug development.
Well, I mean, I can remember going to various scientific meetings, where they were kind of flying their pirate flag and, um, showing up with the idea of, we're gonna buy 100, mouse cages or, whatever. Wheeled cages. Yeah, there was this great idea that they were going to have wheeled. I mean, that was one of the lower points. They came up with this idea that they were going to have put mice in cages with motorized wheels and measure their progression as by measuring their activity on the wheel. But then it turned out that as the mouse got progressive disease, it stopped using the wheel, so that technique kind of fell by the wayside.
But the thing about things like that was they always popped back incredibly quickly from those things. And there was a ton of humor in the whole group, including Stephen, who was incredibly funny. And, it was like setbacks were, part of the deal after a while. And something like that was.
And Stephen would often say, he'd hear about another drug and he would not just immediately get excited that this was going to be the answer. He was always patient enough to see what it would be. I mean, it's been a while since we've seen the film, and kind of thrown ourselves back into that time. But I mean, just thinking about the fact that, one of the cheap ways of raising money in the very early days was when Melinda did belly dance fundraisers at the Caroon restaurant, which I'm assuming probably wouldn't fund you guys for more than a day or so at this point.
But they were wonderful.
But it was really important then. And, it was also kind of community building. And, it engaged donors and created a community around the idea of what can we do to make a difference.
Over the 5 years they spent filming at ALS TDI, Stephen and Jeanne say they watched the organization go through dramatic highs and lows as they quickly grew from a small startup into a respected scientific institution.
Well, on some levels, I feel like we sort of saw them grow up. It was at the beginning, it was very, sort of run and gun, and everything was, there's a scene, I think it's still in the film, of moving furniture, and everybody was like all hands on everything. And as it grew, it became, and as disappointments happened, it became a sober, more intense group. I would say that it was always great fun to be with them all. There were a lot of really great personalities involved, but it became clear, I think, at the beginning of any family's journey with ALS, I know this was true with mine, that you feel like there's got to be something you can do, and there is something you can do, and you're going to be the ones to do it. I've never seen anyone go at it quite like the Heywoods did, but I know people continue to do that to this day. It was very moving, but it also is a steep learning curve and a hard learning curve.
And I think one of the things that happened in the kind of maturation process was, the original concept was that we can shortcut the usual research protocols. And over time, it seemed to me, it became clear that you really couldn't shortcut them in the way that they hoped to, that they weren't going to just find something lying around that was going to just work. And so things became more professionalized, or more like the rest of the research industry, which has been a good thing because it's become, such an authority in ALS research, as opposed to what it was originally, which was, people use the expression, kind of cowboy science in some ways, that it was trying to, kind of jumpstart things that really have to be taken on, methodically, and can't be shortcut.
It wasn't just the organization that grew and matured during those 5 years, however. It was also the people. Many of the early team members who appeared in the film went on to become ALS TDI's leaders throughout the years.
Well, Ken Thompson was really something to watch. Ken go from Stephen's best friend. Ken and Robert Bonazzoli were like, and Stephen were these really three great friends. And I think that Ken came into it just wanting to do anything he could to help, and he had background to do it, but we saw him become incredibly knowledgeable, and his sensitivity and his empathy helped him so much to see what was possible, what wasn't possible, and he kept a kind of even keel. And we really just saw him develop his science chops in an amazing way.
Well, and the other person is Fernando,
Right.
who originally was a researcher, and then he I don't even know if he had his degree in the beginning.
I'm not sure. I feel like
yeah.
Fernando was in school, but I'm not positive about that.
Right. Anyway, to see his development and to take over the leadership, that's been incredible.
Right.
What he's done.
And I also remember Sean Scott being there and and he's someone who was dealing with ALS himself. And there were Larry, I can't remember Larry's last name, but there were people that were dealing with ALS themselves. And Sean Scott was a great example of that, who was really, I think, a great mentor to people. I know that Fernando and he were very close, and it was really amazing just to see all of these people develop there was never anything casual about it, but it went from high hopes to in the trenches and working terribly hard all the time.
Well, and I remember talking to Sean about, he had, I think one of the reasons he had started working was he was able to source these very hard to find drugs, wherever he could get them. And it was very much that kind of run and gun, I can find, we've got a lead on a drug concept. I can find it in Mexico. I'm going to bring it here. And to see, to go from that kind of, almost Wild West sense of pulling it together, bootstrapping it up, to what it has become now, has been a real evolution of technique.
However, the film is about much more than the evolution of ALS TDI as a drug discovery lab. The heart of the film is in the story of the Heywoods and how their love for their son and brother fueled ALS TDI's efforts to end ALS.
I have to say that in some ways, watching what they went through is, I think, what every family that deals with ALS goes through, is this arc of, at the beginning, just disbelief, total belief that something has to be out there, something has to be possible. And it is a sobering journey, and it breaks my heart that it is still a journey that people have to take. But I know that ALS TDI has made it so much, given people so much more help, hope. I mean, if they had existed when my mother was diagnosed, it would have been just the best thing in the world, just to have people who knew what this was. So many people did not even know what ALS was.
And I'm sure still don't.
Yeah.
Who get diagnosed.
Yeah.
The other thing that we really wanted to show in the film is, thanks to all the enabling of his family and his indomitable spirit, Stephen really lived his life as maximally as one can, given his progressing symptoms, and continued to build houses and be a father and really lived, I don't mean it, it can sound like a cliche, but he really lived his life as fully as anybody could. And we really wanted to show that in the film, that, this was not a film about someone dying of ALS. It was somebody living with ALS and making the most of his opportunities and constantly adapting through technology often, whether it was, his mouse or his wheelchair, being able to play video games. Eventually, it's interesting that today people are talking about Neuralink as though it's this breakthrough technique to control a cursor with your mind. Well, Stephen was in the BrainGate study, 20 years ago, and
Right,
was
or
doing
more.
did the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So he was on the cutting edge of technical solutions to enable as a full a life as possible, and we really wanted that to be an important part of the film.
And there was this way that because Stephen and Jamie and Ben, they were real gamers. Dungeons and Dragons was like, their life's blood to them at the time. And I think that Stephen was always completely capable of imagining life with an avatar. I really think that he believed that he could have a full life of the mind. And I remember when we saw the movie Avatar, it was after Stephen had died, and it made us so sad, but also just smile to think that's Stephen. That's what Stephen imagined for himself. He was really someone who was at the forefront of the way patients come at this disease. I know there are many people that are that way now.
And adapting to it.
Right. And enjoying every minute with his wonderful family, Wendy and Alex and all of them. It was just really wonderful to watch.
So Much So Fast came out in 2006. While it was released before his death, Stephen Heywood passed away later that year.
Well, I think that, people... There was once a guy said something about a film that we had done about my family's farm, as it has the two Ds. It's documentary and it's depressing. And I think that most people had this attitude of being almost afraid to see the film because they didn't, they didn't think they could handle it. The truth of the matter is, and why it got into Sundance, and we had such a wonderful time at Sundance with the Heywoods. We all went. I think the fact that there was so much humor in it, and there were so many unexpected moments. It wasn't what you thought it was going to be. It wasn't a film about a guy dying of ALS. And in fact, Stephen didn't die while we were doing the film, and it was just kind of bracing to see people come into theaters kind of and leave laughing. And, that says something about the spirit of ALS TDI now. And we've gone every year to the annual dinner, and it's always full of funny stories and people that are, there's a kind of Black humor that comes along with dealing with something like ALS. And it's very valuable for people to know that exists, that it is not tragedy 24/7. It's not.
In the nearly 20 years since the film came out, Stephen and Jeanne have maintained a close friendship with the Heywood family. They've also remained supporters of ALS TDI. They say that they never could have imagined just how far the organization would come when they began filming all those years ago.
I'm incredibly, incredibly proud of what has happened here. And I mean, it's not like I didn't think when we started the film that we were watching something extraordinary. I just don't know that if we even had the imagination to know how extraordinary it would be. The fact that it is what it is now, and it's the authoritative figure in the world of ALS that it is now. And when I tell people that we started filming them when they began, it's astonishing to them. They can't believe it's the same organization. So I just think pride in what you've all accomplished.
The documentary So Much So Fast is available to rent or buy on most streaming platforms, including Apple, YouTube, and Amazon Prime Video. There are currently no treatments to stop or reverse ALS, but the ALS Therapy Development Institute is working to change that. To learn more about ALS TDI and our research to end ALS, visit als.net. Thanks for listening.